Let's get started. Okay, good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Zevachim Daf Kuf Beis, a little bit of a larger blot. So we'll be stopping right at the very end of Kuf Beis and Mid Beis, and then Mir Hashem over Shabbos we'll try and catch up. But some of the upcoming blot are a little bit long. We'll catch up at some point. We're right now in the middle of a sugya about whether or not Moshe Rabbeinu was a Kohen. We are on the top of Kuf Beis and Mid Aleph, about 8 lines down. Mesvei. Was he in fact a Kohen? Chamesh smachos, the Brisa says. This is from the Sefer Seder Olam, which seems to have been lost from us, other than the fact that it's quoted throughout Shas. There were 5 happy things. Hayasa Elisheva Yisera al Benos Yisrael. There were 5 things that Elisheva, who was Aaron's wife, there are 5 things about her that she had above the other women. And there's actually an added line here, ve'evel echad, and one negative thing as well. That's actually how it's written in Seder Olam. So what were the 5 positive things and what was the one negative thing? I think we all know the one negative thing, that her children died. We're on the top of Kuf Beis Amud Aleph, about 10 lines down. So what was number 1? Yevama, her brother-in-law, Melech. Who was Elisheva's brother-in-law? Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe was a Melech. Isha, which really with a dagesh, if we're going to be proper, Kohen Gadol. Her husband was a Kohen Gadol. Bina Skan, one of her sons was the Skan Kohen Gadol. Ben Bina was Mashuach Milchama. That was a reference to Pinchas, who was a Mashuach Milchama. The Achya, her brother, Nasi Shevet, Rashi points out it was Nachshon ben Aminadab. So this was quite the mishpacha. These people, every last one of them were great beyond great, and that word isn't even close to capturing what we're talking about. So, what was the Avel? The Avela al Shnei Vaneha, that her 2 sons had died. Now, in regards to the discussions about whether or not Moshe was a Kohen or not, we have a diuk that we can make from here. Katani Mihas, the last of the short lines reads, Yevama Melech, Melech in Kohen Gadol. It says in Seder Olam that Elisheva's Yevama, Elisheva's brother-in-law, which was Moshe, was a king. If he's a king, he's not a Kohen. So it must be that he's not a Kohen. Kasha. So the Gemara says not necessarily. Ema af melech. Perhaps we can say that he was even a king. Namely, he was both. Why can't you be a melech and be a Kohen? No harm, no foul. So then the Gemara points out, actually, kitanoi. It actually is a machlokes tanoim about Moshe Rabbeinu as to whether or not he was a Kohen. Let's learn some other very interesting Mar Makomos. The pasuk says, "Vayichar af Hashem b'Moshe," that Moshe angered Hashem. Hashem got angry at Moshe. So if you look at the pasuk, this is Shemos Daled. Vayichar af Hashem b'Moshe vayomer halo Aharon achicha halevi yodati ki daber yedaber hu v'gam hine hu yotzek likrasecha. All right, here's what the Gemara says. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha Omer, Kol Charon Af Shabbatorah. Whenever the Torah uses the language of Charon Af, Ne'emar Bo Roshem, something happens in the world. There's no such thing as anger in a vacuum. There has to be some manifestation, some type of physical onesh, physical manifestation in the world. Otherwise, it breaks the rule. This is the rule. V'zelo ne'emar bo roshem. But over here in this pasuk in Shmos Daled, where it says Vayichar af Hashem b'Moshe, there was no roshem. Says the Gemara, that's not true. Reb Shimon ben Yochai Omer, af ze ne'emar bo roshem. There was in fact a manifestation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's anger. What was the manifestation of Hashem's anger? Shneimar halo Aharon achicha halevi. The pasuk says, Aaron, your brother, is a Levi. The Gemara asks on the pasuk, what are you talking about? Aaron is not a Levi. V'halo kohen hu. And the Gemara adds in the words on the side, Ella hachi ka'amar le. This is actually what was happening that Hashem was saying to Moshe. Ani amarti, really Hashem said, my game plan with you, Moshe, was ata kohen v'hu Levi. Achshav, now that I got angry at you, I'm flipping it. Now, hu kohen v'ata Levi. But the initial plan was that Aaron would be a Levi. So that's a fascinating mahalach in the Gemara. That's the Tanakama. V'chachamim omrim, lo niskahin Moshe ela shivas yimei miluim bilvad. No. You got it all wrong. The Chachamim did not hold the same way as Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, and they held that Moshe was only a Kohen for the Shivas Yimei Miluim and for nothing else. The Yesh Omrim, there are those who say Still differently, the third shita. Lo paska kahuna elamizaro shel Moshe. Moshe was a Kohen, but it stopped with Moshe. He was a Kohen, again, just because of the uniqueness of his role and his responsibilities. But Lemaisa, it was he who was a Kohen, but his children were not. Shneamar, Moshe Isha Elokim, Banav Yikru al Shevet Halevi. His sons were referred to as Shevet Levi. What about him? Must be that he was a Kohen. So that's pasuk number one that the Yesh Omrim quotes of Moshe Isha Elokim, Omer, and the other pasuk that our base medrash has made quite musical. Moshe ve'Aaron b'chol anav u'Shmuel b'korei shemo. Moshe and Aaron were amongst the Kohanim. So here we see that he's a Kohen as well. And says the Gemara, Mai ve'Omer. Yes, it does. It does. But the context of the pasuk certainly seems to indicate Moshe ve'Aaron b'chol anav. No, the comma goes after Bechona. Why? What? No.
Moshe, comma, the Aaron. Moshe is Moshe. We all know. We all know who Moshe is. The Aaron Kohen, and Aaron, who was great at being the Kohen, Shmuel, Shmuel. Right. That
it's not. Yeah.
Right. Chana Davin, she should have a child that is Shakol Moshe the Aaron. This is the raya from this pasuk. But
yeah, no, it's definitely not how it was read here. That's for sure. Yeah. But okay, so right. So Ma've Omer, why do we need the second pasuk? So says the Gemara, v'chi tema, that the first pasuk, when it said Moshe Isha Elokim Banav Yikru al Shevet Alevi, that was Lidoros hu dechsiv, that was talking about generations, and maybe Moshe also really wasn't a Kohen. A little bit of a difficult piece of Gemara, but that is how to understand it. So Rashi says it as well, that maybe Moshe wasn't a Kohen either. Therefore, because there was another way to understand that pasuk, that maybe both Moshe and his children were not Levis, were not Kohanim, excuse me. Therefore, we had the second pasuk. Therefore, the Omer Moshe v'Aaron b'choanav. So we needed a double pasuk to prove that Moshe wasn't Kohen. What? Moshe ve'Aaron b'choanav. Yeah, it is. How would you say Kohan? How would you say Kohanim Shelo? You'd say Kohanav. Yeah. Hold on one second. Haim Kohanim. How would you say HaKohanim Shelo? Kohanav. You would still say Kohanav. No. It has to be of his. That's above at the end is Kohanav, his Kohanim. So if you want to say HaKohanim Shelo, Kohanim Shelo, it would be Kohanav. Yeah. But if the word is Kohanav and it's going to be of his, I don't know.
Right, if it's referring to a third person, correct.
Yeah, correct. That's what it looks like. Okay, the Gemara then questions Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha's presumption. The Gemara says a third of the way down, 8-9 lines into the Y lines. The Gemara says, fascinating story. I've never heard this Gemara until this morning, until I learned it for the first time. The Gemara says, and these are one of the things you would expect to see, like in one of your drawing sheets in second grade. Maybe not, it's a little chutzpahdik, but you'll see in a minute why I'm saying that. That they left Paro and there was Chariaf. And you, Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, said that Kol Pam, every time, Kol Charon Af Shebatorah Ne'amar Bo Roshem. But over here says our Gemara, Velo Amar Le Velo Midi. Nothing else happened after that. So the Gemara says that's because you didn't see the whole picture. Amar Reish Lakish Staraviyata, he smacked him across the face. Paro. He smacked Paro across the face and then he walked out. So there was a Roshem. Rashi, just to make sure that we're not mistranslating, Hikahu al lachayo. He hit him on his cheek. Right? I'm just trying to imagine doing that and then getting out of the room. Like I just, it's an unbelievable thing. I mean, Moshe had clout. He had a certain gravitas to him, obviously, and there was obviously layers and layers and layers of siyata d'ishmaya here in all of these dialogues. But that's what the Gemara says. He hit him on the face. Says the Gemara, Reish Lakish of all people can't get away with that exclamation, with that explanation. Why not? Umi Amar Reish Lakish Haksi B'nitzavta likraso al svas hayor. He stood to greet him on the edge of the water. But Amar Reish Lakish, And now we have missing words here. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu Moshe, Melechu, v'hispir lo panim. He's a king, and he needs to be engaged that way. Rashi, Rashi just to the right of us, halfway down a little bit more. Dibur hamaschil hisbir lo panav. V'hayinu, that's what the pasuk means when it says v'nitzavta likraso, lefigdu laso, hikon likraso. Prepare to go meet him. So if Reish Lakish holds that Melechu and V'hizbir lo panim, there's no way that Moshe smacked Paro across the face. And Reish Lakish was the one who answered that he did it that way. That's not possible. But Rav Yochanan Amar, no, Rashu v'heiz panabon, you can smack him across the face all you want. He's a Rasha, I don't mind one bit. So had it been Rav Yochanan, kafta referach, but it wasn't. Reish Lakish was the one who said staro, that staro v'yatza. Says the Gemara, you're right. Epoch. Switch the shitas. It was really Rav Yochanan who said that no, it's v'nitzavta likraso and v'hiko, and we have to make sure that we treat him like a king. And it was Reish Lakish who said you're allowed to smack him across the face. It was azus, no problem at all. Okay, halfway down. Amar Rav Yanai, Gemara we're going to see again in Maseches Menachos in a couple of months. Amar Rav Yanai, la'olam tehei emas malchus alecha. You should always have the fear of a king on you. This was a comment that Moshe said. If you look at the pasuk in Shmos Yud Aleph, the pasuk says, "V'yardu kol avodecha elai v'yishtachavu li leimor tzei ata v'chol ha'am asher beraglecha v'achreichen etzei v'yetzem min par b'chareya." So the pasuk says that Moshe is talking. Who did Moshe not include when he said everyone's going to bow down? V'ilu ledidei lo ka'amar. He didn't include Paro. Because it's a chutzpah. That's not the way we treat a king. And another pasuk, Rabbi Yochanan Amar Mehacha v'yad Hashem ha'yisa el Eliyahu v'yesh. What is that word? The pasuk is Vaishanes. Vaishanes Mosnav v'yeretz lefanav lifnei Achav. Eliyahu ran to be in front of Achav to show him kavod, even though he was a Rasha Merusha. He was not a tzaddik at all. Afal Pikein, we treat the king with a certain level of honor. Amar Ula, this is another, all these Gemaras are so interesting. Amar Ula, Moshe bikesh malchus v'lo nesano lo. Moshe had requested that his family be the replacement of the Davidic dynasty, that all the kings should come from him. But he didn't get that as a matana. So it says the Gemara, D'chsiv. How do we know he didn't get it? It says, Al tikrav halom. This was the story of the sneh. This is going to be from Shmos Perek Gimel. The pasuk reads, Vayomer al tikrav halom. Shal na'alecha me'al raglecha, ki hamakom asher ata omeid alav ad mas kodeshu. So it says, Al tikrav halom. Ve'ein halom ela malchus. The word halom is always connected to Malchus. Shne'emar, as David said, Mi anochi Hashem Elokim v'gomer ki haviyasani ad halom, that you brought me to Malchus. So when it says Al tikrav halom by Moshe, there's a double meaning over here. One is don't go over there with your shoes on, and the other is you don't get the Malchus. So Moshe might have wanted Malchus, bikesh Malchus below nesano. Says the Gemara, something's wrong with that. He was a king. Masiv Rava, Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Yevama Melech. Remember, we said at the top of the page that Elisheva, Aaron's wife, had 5 great things going for her. One of them is that her brother-in-law was a king. So what do you mean, velo nesanolo? Pashat, that he was a melech. Says the Gemara, Omar Rava, and this is actually probably not who it was. The correction on the side, Rabba Bar Ula, Amar Rabba Bar Ula, Lo Ulazaro Kamar. What he wanted was that it would be generational. It wouldn't just be him, but it would also be his descendants. He got the him part, but not the generational part. So his children will not be. Says the Gemara, halom ledorosu. Are you sure that every time it has the word halom, that it's a reference to generations? Or ad olam, ledoros ad olam, who is the correct girsa. V'agabe Shaul, there, by Shaul it says, D'chsiv have od halom ish, that they were trying to find Shaul. Shaul was hiding. He was a big onav before he became king. He didn't want to become king. So there it said the word halom, but who in Zarolo, it didn't work out that way. Shaul's whole kingship fell apart with all the machlokas that Shaul had with David. So it says the Gemara, well, there might have been some truth to it, because Ibais Ema, Hahava Ishboshes. Ishboshes was the king for about 2 years, and he was the son of Shaul. So really, there was a generational aspect to Shaul's leadership. V'baisema shiny Shaul de'afilu begave lokai. Maybe things were different because he didn't even make it through his malchus, right? Why? Kid Rabbi Lazar Amar Reb Chanina. Rabbi Lazar, who learned from Reb Chanina, said, and let's get the gears to change on the side. De Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Reb Chanina, classical syntax in the Gemara that's just missing here. B'shah sheposkim gedula le'adam. When a person is gifted with greatness, poskim lo ulazaro atzov kol adoros, then it stays with that person and all of his generations. Shene'emar, as the pasuk says in Sefer Iyov, lo yigra mitzadik einav. Ve'es milachim lakisei v'gomer. So says the Gemara that we're not going to take it from the tzaddik. But v'im higis daito, if a person does, if they're higis daito, which is loosely translated as if he becomes a bal gaiva, HaKadosh Baruch Hu mashpilo. Let's say a person was brought to Gdula, someone becomes a Rav of a shul. Beforehand, they were a humble erlich, a younger man learning in the base medrash. Now, all of a sudden, they feel like the Eibishter's right hand man. It's good to have confidence, but it's not good to be pompous. It says the Gemara, Kodesh Baruch Hu Mashpilo, Shne'emar, as the pasuk says, also in Iyov. The pasuk says, "Ve'im asurim bazikim yilachedun bechavlei oni." That if a person gets trapped up in all the chains, then they're going to have the pangs of destitution, the pangs of being poor. And all of this is a mashal for being a Baal Gaiva. So Shaul might have been different because he became seemingly haughty in his kingship.
Right. Problem was that he became lovable.
In the beginning, you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's what it means here. V'im higis daitom. That he I guess again it's hard it's because we've learned the story of David, and so it doesn't sound like that's what he's going through, but obviously
Or something like that. If it's a haftorah, I might have a chance. Otherwise,
yeah,
forget it.
yeah.
But
yeah. What does the pasuk say there?
Something like you shuffle necha, right? You consider yourself low, it's great, but you needed to be gvura.
I'm trying to remember the pasuk also because it's a song. I won't remember it from the Haftorah, but there was a song that had.
Some lashon like that, you shuffle necha or something.
I'm gonna remember. I have to let my head go to the music part of my brain. I can't do that right now. Okay, says the Gemara at the two dots, 10 lines from the bottom of Kuf Beis Amud Aleph. Says the Gemara as follows: Baalei Mumin. We said the Baalei Mumin are still allowed to have access to korbanos. Baalei Mumin, even Bein Baalei Mumin over and Bein Baalei Mumin kavua, doesn't matter. They're still minani. How do we know that Baalei Mumin of all kinds who are Kohanim are still allowed to benefit from korbanos? So says the Gemara, the Tanu Rabbanon. The rabbis taught us, and I'm just going to be clear here. We have 3 separate psukim that all have the same phraseology. So I'll be clear as to what pasuk is what and why we needed all 3. But let's remember what we're after. We're after why Baalei Mumin are allowed to eat food even if they are not Ra'ui lehakrava. So says the Gemara as follows. Kol Zachar, this pasuk is talking about a korban mincha. Kol Zachar lerabos Baalei Mumin. This comes to teach us that a Kohen Zachar, who is a Baal Mum, is allowed to eat the korban mincha, or so we know he's I should say he's lerabos. He's been included. They asked the Gemara, Lamai, what has this Kohen Zachar been included with as a Baal Mum? Ile achila, it can't be for food because Harei Karnemar lechem elokav mikodesh hakodoshim yochal. That pasuk was broad enough that it included even Baalei Mumin. So the pasuk of Kol Zachar by Mincha isn't there to teach us about that. So therefore, Ella, what does the pasuk of Kol Zachar come to teach us? Lechaluka, that they got a specific portion. Right? They were on the list. Balmum, you're Karesh the Kohen, Balmum, here you go. You're allowed to have this piece of meat. They were distributed to, not just stam if I found some meat and a friend gave me a bite of the corned beef. No, you were allowed to get an actual portion. So that's what Kol Zachar of Mincha means. Then the Gemara says, Tanya Idach, another brisa, is Kol Zachar by the world of Chatas. So we already spoke about Mincha. Now we're talking about Kol Zachar Chatas, L'Rabos Baalei Mumin. By a Chatas as well, it includes Baalei Mumin. Says the Gemara, well, what does that Kol Zachar mean about Baalei Mumin? Because Ile Achila, if you want to say that it's coming to teach us that a Baal Mum can eat. We already learned that. Harei Kvar Amar, that was the pasuk above of Lechem Elokav Mikotche HaKodoshim Yochal. Ilechaluka, if you want to say that the Baal Mum is included in getting a portion of the meat, Harei Kvar Amar, that was the Kol Zachar from the world of Mincha, the first Kol Zachar that we saw in the Brisa. We have a girsa change over here. The girsa change is Ella. The Baal Mum Mei Ikaro, an animal, a Kohen, excuse me, who was a Baal Mum from birth. Sheyachol Einli Ella Tam V'Nase Baal Mum. I might have thought that maybe the only time a Kohen who's a Baal Mum is allowed to eat is if it happened once he was born healthy and then became a Baal Mum. But Baal Mum Me'ikaro Minayin, how would I know that a Baal Mum Me'ikaro is going to be allowed to benefit from the food as a Baal Mum? How is that possible? Talmud Lomar Kol Zachar Avachatas. So now we have regular Baal Mum and we have Baal Mum Me'ikaro. And then Tanya Idach, we have another source of Kol Zachar. This Kol Zachar is from the world of Asham. And that's also the Rabbo's Baal Mum. So we have the same drasha 3 times, one by Mincha, one by Chatas, one by Asham, and we have to answer up for all of them. Lemai, what does this Kol Zachar come to teach us, the one by Asham? Ile achila hare kvar amar from the pasuk of Lechem Elokav Mikotche HaKodashim Yochal. Ile chaluka hare kvar namar from the pasuk of Kol Zachar from Mincha. Ile balmu me'ikaro hare kvar amar from the pasuk of Kol Zachar by Chatas. Sheyachol ein li ela balmum kavua balmum over minayin. Maybe I would have argued, I understand that if the person has a balmum kavua, that he's allowed to benefit. The Kohen's allowed to get the meat. But maybe with a balmum over, I might have thought he wasn't allowed to benefit. Kamash malan, that's not correct. Talmud Lomar Kol Zachar of the word Asham. So as you can see here, these 3 brisas in a row quoting, it's actually, 3 brisas quoting the various Kol Zachars, the Kol Zachar of Mincha, of Chatas, and of Asham. Each of them have their place. One of them is for Chaluka. One of them is to make sure that we know that a Baal Mum Me'ikaro is still allowed to benefit. And one of them is to teach us that a Baal Mum Over, that one who has a temporary Baal Mum, he too is allowed to participate. The Gemara says on this last Nakuda, Klape Laya, you've got everything backwards. Look at the last line that we just saw, 2 lines from the bottom. We said that I understand mum kavua, the guy who has a permanent blemish, but I'm not sure that we should include the guy with a temporary Baal Mum. That makes no sense at all. The guy who, it should have been more obvious that the guy who tomorrow won't be a Baal Mum because he's going to heal, he should have been the obvious one to include. Mechatesi, that you should say it's pashut that the person who's a Baal Mum kavua is more obvious to us that he should be included in accessing meat as a Kohen Zachar Baal Mum, if he's a Baal Mum kavua, than someone whose Mum status is going to go away tomorrow. That's very odd. So the Gemara says, Amar of Sheshes Epoch, you're 100% right. The phraseology of that brisa should be reversed. And really what the Gemara should read is like this. If we were to look back up 3 lines from the bottom. Sheyachol ainli ela balmum over balmum kavua minayin. That would have made a lot more sense. So the first answer that we have in the Gemara from Rav Sheshes is epuch, that we need to switch around the flow of that last brisa. Rav Ashi Amar no, lo olam lo tepuch. There is a chiddush being learned by the Baal Mum Over. What's that? The Itzrich. We still need to teach the case, even though you're right. In principle, it should be more obvious that the Baal Mum Over should be included in Kohen things. I might have thought, turning to the top of Kuf Beis Amud Beis, I might have thought, ki tameh, just like a person who's tameh. Ma tameh, hamadalo tahor lo achil. For as long as a person is tameh, he's not allowed to eat the meat, a kohen. Af hai nami, even this person too, even the Baal Mum Over. Kama delo misakein lo achil, kamash malan. Says the Gemara, the Baal Mum Kavua got a pasuk to clean it up. That's no problem at all. But I might have thought that the Baal Mum Over is equivalent to a tameh, for whom there is no leniency until he's tahor. I might have had a havamina that the Baal Mum Over is exactly like that tameh. That's what the language is at the top. Ki tameh. He's exactly the same. Says the Gemara, kamash malan. The chiddush is, don't equate a Baal Mum Over with a tameh, even though it's rational on some level. No. State in Chumash, kol zachar, kol zachar, kol zachar. 3 different inclusions about about a Baal Mum. One, we can go through all three of them just to be misaking. The first time we learn about Kol Zachar from the Mincha, it reminds us about the Chalukah. Not only can they eat, but they actually get a portion. The second time it told us that a Baal Mum may ikaro, someone who was born with a Baal Mum, he's still allowed to participate. And the third was Machlokes in the Gemara, what the Chiddush is, was it to teach us about a Baal Mum Kavu or to teach us about a Baal Mum over. But all three of these psukim by the Kol Zachar by Mincha, the Kol Zachar by Chatas, and the Kol Zachar by Asham all teach us an aspect of Balmum that is included in accessing Korbanos. The Gemara says on the top of Kuf Beis Amud Beis on the third line, Kol She'eno Roi below. Is that really true that someone who isn't Roi is not allowed to participate? Varei Balmum, the lo Roi Lavoda V'cholek. We just spent time talking about the Balmum extensively, looking at all the Mara Mekomos. The Gemara says that a Balmum is not Roi for Avoda, but he's allowed to get a portion. But our Mishnah said that if you're not Roi for Avoda, then you're not allowed to get that. So the Balmum's a stira. V'su, and furthermore, Haroi La'avoda Cholek. If you want to say that it's about Roi La'avoda, that once you're Roi for Avoda, then you get a portion, Hare Tame Bekorbanos Tzibor, the Roi La'avoda Ve'eno Cholek. When we have a case where most of Klal Yisrael is Tameh, and it becomes a case of Tuma Hutra B'Tzibor, so there you're allowed to do the Avoda, but the individual Kohen himself doesn't get to take any of the food. So there we see a steer as well. So therefore the Gemara says, you're right. You're right. It's not about Ra'ui La'avoda. It's about Ra'ui La'achila. Says the Gemara, Ra'ui La'achila Kamar. The Gemara says, well, wait 1 second. V'harei katan de Ra'ui La'achila ve'eno cholek. The katan can have a little bit of his father's, but he doesn't get a piece. So says the Gemara, halok tani. We weren't talking about that. We weren't talking about whether or not a katan can have it. We were only speaking about the negatives. Kol she'eno ra'oi la'achila. We weren't talking about who is roi la'achila. We were talking about the people who are eno roi la'achila. And in short, the Gemara is saying you can't make a diuk from here. That's not what the Mishnah was focusing on. We were only focusing on those who were eno roi. Says the Gemara, Hashta da asis lahachi. Now that we've given this answer, la'olam kedika amar me'ikara. It must be like we said earlier, Rashi kedamrin and me'ikara rawi lavoda. Once you're going to go and say you can't make a diuk from here, then I can undo your question of Baal Mum that you asked at the open of the Gemara. At the open of the Gemara, you said Hare Baal Mum is not Roi Vavoda, but that's Cholek. The Gemara says, oh, you're right. We're just going to say that we're talking about, it's not Roi Lavoda, it's Roi Lachila. No, give the same answer you just gave a second ago about the Katan, which is that we're not talking about that. We're not talking about who is Roi. We're talking about who's not Roi. That's what the Gemara says. And then the Gemara adds as follows. Imishum Tame Loktani. Imishum Balmum Rachman Rabye. If we were talking about Tame, says the Gemara, a Tame is not Ktani. That it wasn't mentioned. Imishum Balmum, then you don't have to worry about a Balmum. So, Rachmana Rabye, that would have been included. That brings us to the next two dots, which is about 12 lines down. And the Gemara speaks about the kashrus status of the person as to how much tuma do they have to be ineligible. Says the Gemara, Afilu tame b'shas rikas damim, v'tahor b'shas hekter chalavim, eino cholek. Look at this. A person who was tame by the zrikas hadam, and then he became tahor by the time they were makdir the chalavim. Says the Gemara, eino cholek. The Gemara says, eino cholek, that person is too tame. What's implied from here? What's implied from here is the following. Hatahor b'shas rikas damim, v'tamei b'shas hekter chalavim, cholek. If it was reversed, then you're good to go. The presentation in our Mishnah was if you're tamei by the zrikas adam and tahor by the hekter chalavim. What if it was reversed? The Gemara says that if you were tahor by the zrikas adam and tamei by the hekter chalavim, you're allowed to be cholek. But that, says the Gemara, may well be fine and true and good for our Mishnah. But Masnisin Deloka Abashol, our Mishnah certainly doesn't agree with Abashol. Detanya, Abashol was much more of a hardliner. Abashol Omer, we're a third of the way down. We're going to head Emir Tashem to the very last line of the page. Masnisin Deloka Abashol, Detanya, Abashol Omer, Leolam Eino Ochel. The Kohen is not allowed to partake in the food. Ad sheyehei tahor mishas zrika ad shas hekter chalavim, with no leniency. You need to be tahor for both of those occurrences, for the zrikas hadam and the hektar chalavim. No halfsies. You have to be that way. So if our Mishnah has a diuk that you could be tahor for one and tameh for the other and still be good to go, that's fine for the Tanakama. That's great for our Mishnah. But certainly, Abba Shaul doesn't hold that way. Why does he not hold that way? The Amar Kra, because there's a pasuk 6 lines before the wide lines. What does the pasuk say? This is a pasuk from Vayikra, Perek Zayin. The pasuk says, "Hamakri v'esdam hashlamim v'es hachelev da'afilu hektar chalavim nami boy." We need you to be tahor for that also. That's how Abba Shaul learns the pasuk. Pretty clean learning of the pasuk. I guess the Gemara doesn't do this, but how does the Tanakama? How does our Mishnah learn that pasuk? The Gemara doesn't go into that. The Gemara says that within this shita we have a question at the 2 dots here. It's not a real 2 dots. It's just a pretend one. Boy Rashi nitma b'hintayim mahu. According to Abba Shaul, you need to be tahor during Zrikas Hadam, and you need to be tahor during Hektar Chalavim in order to be eligible for the meat. Well, what if you became tummy in between and then went to the mikvah? So says the Gemara, B'shas Zrika uv'shas haktara ba'inan v'ha'ika. Well, I checked the box that Abba Shaul told me to do. I was tahor during Zrika and tahor during Hektar Chalavim. O Dilma, or perhaps we need some continuity between those two moments. O Dilma, ad sheyehe tahor mishas Zrika ve'ad shas Hektar Chalavim. Was Abba Shaul being, real militant and saying you must be tahor the whole entire time? Or could it be that you could become tameh in the middle, and then once you're tahor by hektar chalavim, you're back in the saddle and you're allowed to partake? So it says the Gemara Teku. We don't know the answer to that question. Okay, we are about to learn a difficult Gemara. The Gemara on its face is a difficult shakla b'tari. The conclusions are clear, but it really requires much more time than we have. I'm going to do my very best to be as clear as I possibly can because the shakla b'tari is sophisticated. So let's get started with this piece of Gemara. We're 2 lines before the wide lines. It says Amar Rava. On the side here, it corrects it to Amar Rav, which is a gap of about almost 100 years of history. But the Gemara seems to say that Rav was the author here. Hi Dina, mi Rabbi Elazar bereb Shimon Gemirna. We also now know why it says it can't be Rava, because Rabbi Elazar bereb Shimon he was a Tana. So it had to be someone who lived at that time. And it says Gemirna, I learned it from him. But look at this weird oddity in the Gemara. De Amar beveis hakisei. He said it in the bathroom. So we're going to discuss that little nakuda, because as we know, we're not allowed to talk in learning, and we're really not even allowed to be meharher in learning when we are in the bathroom. It's that famous story of the Gra that they say that he wrote a math book on Euclidean geometry whenever he was in the bathroom. He couldn't help himself because he was such a learner. He was shagur b'fiv. So they say. I don't know. Does anybody know if it's true? It's a story they tell.
The fact that you weren't going to sit idle. You needed to force the Torah thoughts out.
Yeah. You have to replace it. And something sophisticated.
Yeah. Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What's he going to do? Read the... Yeah. But that's the word on the street. I don't know what Euclidean geometry is. What's Euclidean geometry? Do you know? Dad, don't be humble. Okay, so that's what the Gemara says. Let's see what halacha Rav learned from Rabbi Elazar bereb Shimon. Dansa, we're going to be done the following case. And all of this is going to be about the halachos of a tvul yom. Just to review, a tvul yom is someone who has checked all of the boxes. Anything he had to bring or do, he's done. He's gone to the mikvah. He just has to wait for the sun to set. So says the Gemara as follows. Ba tvul yom ve'amar. Let's say a tvul yom says, Tain li mi mincha, the word should be added Yisrael. Tain mi mincha Yisrael va'ochel. Now remember, a tvul yom is not really supposed to participate in any of this stuff, but he does have a rationale. He says to the Kohen who's at the Mishmar, I'm hungry. I'm a tvul yom. Can you please give me from the mincha of the Yisrael who just brought this korban mincha? Amar lo, the Kohen on the avoda, who's actually tahor, says back to the tvul yom, Uma im b'makom sheyofe kochacha b'chatascha. Even in a case where you would have had a good positioning, a good power with a chatas, and what does that mean? That even if I'm a Kohen, even if it's not my mishmar, but if I'm bringing my own chatas, as a Kohen, I can always bring my own. Even during your mishmar, I'm allowed to bring my own. So even in that case, where yafe kochacha bechatascha, because if I'm a Kohen, I can always bring my own korban, dichisicha michatas Yisrael. I could still push you away and say, no, you can't have it. Makom shehura kochacha b'minchascha, then you who are in a weaker position with the korban mincha, eno din sha'adi chacham minchas Yisrael, all the more so I'm going to push you away from the mincha of Yisrael. So this is a little bit of a shtickle kal v'chomer type of thing. If in a place where you have more control, which is by a chatas, the answer is going to be no, then pashut by a mincha where you have less control, the answer is going to be no. Says the Tvul Yom back to the Tahor Kohen. He says, "Umayim dechisani mechatas Yisrael shekshem shiyafe kochi kach yafe kochacha." Well, that's not true because he says back to the Tahor Kohen. But yeah, you and I both have level footing. But tidichani minchas Yisrael shekshem shura kochi kach hura kochacha. You and I are always the same. We're not me and you are not on different footing. I'm allowed to have my chatas. You're allowed to have your chatas. You're not allowed to have the mincha. I'm not allowed to have. We're in the same place. So that's how he pushes back. So then the Torah Kohen says back to the Tvul Yom, and this is the dagger that ends this first part of the conversation. Harehu Omer. He says to the Tvul Yom, the pasuk state, the Kohen Amakri v'asalo tiyeh. If in fact you want to be able to get that lo tiyeh, if you want to be able to get the mincha, great. Ba hakrei ve'echol. Come here and do the korban, which you can't because you're a Tvul Yom. So that ends this first request of the Tvul Yom, asked and answered. And the Tvul Yom, as we will soon see, will walk away, but Pachei Nefesh, he's going to be upset because until he goes to the mikvah, he's limited. And then the Gemara says there was another request that this Tvul Yom made of a Kohen. Tein li mechatas Yisrael va'ochel. Give me some of the korban of a chatas of a Yisrael. So Amar Le, the Kohen who's tahor says to the Tvul Yom, Uma b'makom shehura kochi b'minchasi d'chisicha miminchas Yisrael. The Kohen says that if I don't have good footing with a korban mincha, I would push that away from you. Makom sheyafe kochi b'chatasi eno din shadicha chamechatas Yisrael. For sure, where I have better footing, I'm not going to give it to you. Amar Le, the Tvul Yom says back to him, Uma'im shedichisani miminchas Yisrael. You're right that when it comes to Minchas Yisrael, you could push me away. Shekshem shehura kochacha kachura kochi. You and I are on level footing. But tidicheni mechatas Yisrael, you're going to push me away from a chatas Yisrael. But we both should have access to a chatas of a Yisrael. Shekshem sheyave kochacha kach yave kochi. Here too, I should have access. We both should have access because even a Kohen who's not in his mishmar is allowed to bring a chatas. So says the Gemara, Harehu Omer, the Kohen who's tahor says back to the Tvul Yom, no. I'll tell you why you're not allowed to have the chatas of Yisrael. Because the pasuk says, "HaKohen HaMechateh Osay Yachlana." The one who does the sprinkling, he's the one who's eating. You want it? Then you got to go do the deed. Ba chateh ve'echol. But you can't because you're a Tvul Yom. So asked and answered number 2. Number 3, Amar Le. The Tvul Yom says to the Kohen who's tahor, Tein li mechazeh v'shok ve'ochel. All right, give me some of the chazeh, some of the shok, some of the breast meat, some of the thigh, and I'll eat it. Amar Le, the Kohen whose Torah says back to the Tvul Yom, Uma b'makom shiyafe kochacha b'chatascha. Even where you're standing on good footing with a chatas, dichisicha mechatas Yisrael, I can still push you away. Skip the parentheses. Makom shehura kochacha b'shlamim. You have a weaker footing when it comes to shlamim. She'ein lecha bahen ela chazav v'shok. You only get the chazav v'shok. So there, eino din sha'adei chacham. Pashat, I'm going to push you up. You have very few privileges with the shlamim. So the Tvul Yom says back to the Kohen who's tahor, Ma'im dechisani mechatas. Says the Gemara that if you want to push me away from a chatas, I agree. Shekain hura et kochi eitzel noshai va'avodai. I have a weakness, says this Kohen who's a Tvul Yom, that even if I had access to a chatas, it has to be eaten by a male Kohen. And therefore, even my wife and even my avadim are not allowed to eat it. That's by a chatas. But tadchini, are you going to push me away? But that's something I can give over to my wife and to my servants. So then the Tvul Yom gets knocked down for the 3rd time. The Kohen whose Torah says to him, Harehu Omer, L'Kohen hazorek es hadam ashlamim lo yeh. The one who is doing the throwing of the blood, he gets to eat. Ba zrok ve'echol. No, let's go. Go do the deed. Obviously, you can't because you're a Tvul Yom, so you also can't get the benefits. So he had asked for a selection of 3 things in these 3 different requests. One was, give me from the Minchas Yisrael. One request was, give me from the Chatas Yisrael. And one request was, give me from the Chazeh and Shok of the Shlamim. And he got turned down on all of them. So these are the 3 examples that Rav learned from Rebbe Lazar Bereb Shimon. Now the Gemara has a question on why we didn't include a fourth request. Says the Gemara, I don't understand something. Oh, sorry, I skipped a line. Yatza Tvul Yom. The Tvul Yom left. Rashi points out he left quite sad. Yatza Tvul Yom, second of the wide lines of Rashi. Yatza Tvul Yom bepache nefesh. Back in the Gemara, Yatza Tvul Yom, he was sad. Kulav v'chamorav al rosho. All of his kulas and all of his chumrah still apply to him. Onein miyamino mechusar kapar mislomo. All of these people, like our Mishnah said, many blot ago at the beginning of this parak, they are all super limited. Right? That's what the Gemara says. Okay, now says the Gemara Parich. I don't understand. This din that we learned from Rebbe Lazar Bereb Shimon that Rav heard from the bathroom, this din should have had another case in it. Parich Rav Achoy, lema le, tein li mi bechor ve'ochel. Why didn't the Tvul Yom ask about a bechor? So the Gemara says, well, that wouldn't have helped. Mishum de Amar le, the Tahor Kohen would have argued to the Tvul Yom, Uma b'makom shehura kochi bechatas etzel nashai ve'avadai dechisicha mechatas Yisrael. Just like in a case where you're limited, such as the shlamim where you get the chaz and the shok, we would push you away. Makom sheyafe kochi bebechor. The Kohen says, I have a better position than the Bechor, the Kule Dili, everything's for me. Eino din shadi chacham imenu, you have no shaychas here. I have the upper hand, it's my mishmar, you're a Tvul Yom. So says the Tvul Yom back to the Kohen. I could understand by the chatas that I have a lesser position, but tidichani mi bechor. Can you really push me away from bechor? You and I are equals with the bechor. Why do you think you're more special than I am? So the Kohen who's Tower says back to the Tvul Yom, Harehu Omer as damam tizrok al hamizbeach v'eschelbam taktir v'saram l'chayeh. The pasuk says, if you're the one who throws the blood, if you're the one who does the hektar chalavim, givaldik l'chayeh bazrok v'echol, then go do it. So the Gemara is bothered. Be'idach, why is it that Rebbe Lazar Reb Shimon didn't include this in his learning? He gave the previous three cases. Why did he leave out the request of a Tvul Yom to ask for a bechor? So says the Gemara, V'idach, Parech, the reason why is because of the structure of the pasuk. Niksiv uvsaram lekohen hazorik. Does the pasuk say, the one that was just quoted a line ago, that the flesh goes to the kohen who is zorik? No. Uvsaram lechayeksiv. Afilu kohen acher. It could be anyone. So that's why Rebbe Lazar Bereb Shimon left out this teaching of Bechor, because it really doesn't have any legs to stand on. And lastly for tonight, and we'll finish right by 9:30, the Heichi Avid Hachi, how could he learn in a bathroom? After all, Ve'amar Rabbi Bar Bar Chanan Rav Yochanan, B'chol makom muter laharher, chutz mimerchatz u'bebeis hakiseh. You're allowed to learn Torah wherever you want. You're not allowed to do it in this way. Rashi articulates the question, Ve'hechi Avid Hachi, Rebbe Lazar Bereb Shimon, De'amar hai dina bebeis hakiseh, mechatesi, how is that even possible? It says the Gemara, le'on so shiny. It's an ones. What kind of ones was it? So says the Gemara, if you need me to learn Torah in the bathroom, you'll have to force me. I'm not so frum. But says the Gemara, La'onsa Rashi points out, Shahaisa shmu'aso shkura befiv u'maharher ba al korcho v'dugmaso shamati b'kedushin. There's a sample there in Daf Lamed Gimel over there. He Pasha couldn't help himself. He was so shagur befiv with learning, he couldn't not learn. Could you imagine a darga, a billionth of a darga like that? We'll stop right here. Mir Hashem will pick up on Shabbos with a fresh mission on the top of Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph. Wishing you all a beautiful night.